Okay, let's talk about the Bravo. This chapter, it was a whale. It was a lot of work, but it also was kind of in a long time development. Originally, the idea for this chapter, I'm sure on in some streamer video at some point, I talked about how the future of what I saw Sam doing would probably be um, uh, being with the glass candle and being kind of obsessed with it, just because it's sort of where the characters kind of go, like Bran being obsessed with being a wolf. I kind of thought Sam would be obsessed with the candle. And then the fans have been debating for a long time whether or not Gilly is going to be on the ship, the Cinnamon Wind, when Marwyn left. It's left ambiguous at the end of the Feast for Crows. So I kind of always had this idea um, that the Sam chapters would be about him like searching for Gilly if she were on that ship. And one of my editors, Royan F, he actually wrote a a Samwell chapter before I even put out the call for submissions. And he wrote a chapter, and he passed it to me. And this Bravo chapter is very, very different, but the idea of events happening in Lice, and it involving a worshiper of Bacalon, and was from that submission. And I remember someone had commented on his, because he had given it to other people for input, and somebody had mentioned in there, oh, this is kind of neat. It's like the George R. R. Martin story Under Siege. And so I started thinking that idea of things being like Under Siege. Under Siege is a story where this time traveling dwarf goes back in time to Finland and is involved in this like military um, uh, operation against the Russians. And there's this idea of like someone in the background of someone's mind, like going back in time, their consciousness, and being in the back of someone's mind, and the relationship between the host and this telepathic like being, um like hit me. And all of that, I thought it was such a cool idea. And so from then I sort of put out the idea for, okay, this is going to be Sam. He's going to be like a god. He's going to be like the god Bacalon. And Dahan is going to be this character who's like worshiping Sam, and that would be kind of the fundamental plot. And then we kind of had to deal with, what do you do at the Citadel, and I the original submission from Royan F, it had a very different story. It was more political, and it had to do, there was much more exploration of Lice. And admittedly, the Bravo chapter, we see very little of Lice. We see Traegar's manse. The other story was very different, but it did there were it did, in a similar fashion, try to bring all of the characters who would have been in Lice together, and so and involve a plot like that. And so that was always sort of, that kind of inspired everything going forward. And so we ended up with, there are things that are still kind of similar to that original idea, but over the months and with all the submissions and everything, so much has changed. But it's still, and so this is kind of the strength of like collaborative ideas and collaborative writing, is you kind of like take one person's idea and you build on it, and then it becomes something bigger, and it builds on it, and then you just get this behemoth chapter like the Bravo, which is just, I feel like it has so many great ideas, and it has so much in there. um and it was, balanced with it feeling like Sam, and addressing all of these things, and using the glass candle to have pictures of things that are happening all over the kingdom. I mean, it was great. There's just so much in here, so much in here. Um, and I remember in the submissions I left it open on who um, Dahan would be. And after reading enough submissions, I realized that we were kind of doing a rescue mission, and a lot of people had submissions where Dahan is a guard, or he's a politician, or different ideas. But I think in the end, because he was someone who was going to be rescuing a a a girl in the end, which is from the original submission. Was this idea that he'd be looking for Gilly, so there'd be this idea that there'd be this mistaken identity versus other slaves. In the original submission actually had slaves from the Shield Islands that the Ironborn would have brought, and it did involve Edric Storm and all sorts of things. The elephant and the ship, the elephant, and all sorts of stuff. But in the end, I think because it was a rescue and somebody's breaking into a manse and trying to steal a girl, I just got in my mind that this was just so much like the Three Musketeers. Like, it's just, if you've never read the Three Musketeers, there's a very famous scene in the middle where D'Artagnan like saves the girl by and then ties sheets together and descends out, and it's the classic swashbuckling tale. So in a sense, I wanted somebody that was very much like a musketeer, and so the Bravo is like the closest thing. So there are a few submissions where he's like that, and so I just kind of, but essentially Bravo just kind of like stuck as like the perfect thing. Like, he's like a musketeer, and this is going to come up later. But so there's so much here. So his command was to save the wildling girl, and Dahan Pedratho was not a man to disappoint his god. I knew that the beginning was very, like, the beginning of almost all the submissions, and even this, it was very disorienting. And so and I even remember my first time reading A Dance with Dragons and being very disoriented by the Varamir chapter, being like, what is this? I thought I'm supposed to get into Ice and Fire. And so I knew that this had to be brief. We had to be clear. If we're in a foreign location with a new character, we need to very quickly know exactly, like, what are the stakes? What are we doing, to try to immediately let people know what the plot is with these and have an element as well that draws people in. So I knew that it had to have the wildling girl, the Pedratho. We worked a long time on trying to find the right name for Dahan. More on that in a second. But he needed to save the wildling girl. He didn't want to disappoint his god. It tells you everything about Dahan being a religious guy. He needs to save the wildling. That's our connection to Ice and Fire that we've had before, and then the command. Originally, the line was he was commanded to save the wildling girl, and it got one of the editors changed it to his command was to save the wildling girl, and I didn't even get it at first. I was like, why was that changed? What was so bad about he was commanded? His command, it's kind of ambiguous if it's a given command from Sam or if it's a received command from Dahan. And then I was like, oh gosh, that's the whole point. Like, his command to save the wildling girl is this beautiful ambiguity of, you don't know where Sam ends and Dahan begins. Is it Sam's command to save the wildling girl, or is it Dahan's command that he receives to save the wildling girl? And it's both at once. And so this, it even, I didn't even get it. Like, I read it and then I remember coming back to it like 2 days later and being like, oh, like, so I want to say that this line here, his command was to save the wildling girl. It's a really genius line. like bravo to the editor there, because it was so different from he was commanded to save the wildling girl. Oh, we're talking about Dahan. his command was to save the wildling girl. Oh, are we talking about Dahan or are we talking about Sam? Beautiful ambiguity there. His command was save the wildling girl. I love that. Dahan Pedratho, we worked a lot on trying to figure out the right name. Dahan is named after a character from And Seven Times Never Kill Man. They're the ones that's where the Pale Child Bacalon comes from. And Dahan is, there's two points of view in that story. And Kara Dahan is kind of he's on the villain's side, but he's the most reasonable of the villains. And you're in his head every once in a while. But his name is Kara Dahan with C apostrophe ARA. And it sounds like a woman's name. And there's also Cara Dune in The Mandalorian. And I personally have a thing about, like, despite the fact that like R'hllor and it's very George R. R. Martin to just add apostrophes in the middle of things, I didn't like it. So I wanted something that sounded like Enrico Montoya, like some, instantly, sexy swashbuckling name. And so we like worked on trying to find the right one. And we changed his name a few times, but I eventually went with Pedratho because I thought it kind of sounded, the tho at the end kind of sounds like you're speaking Castilian Spanish, Dahan Pedratho, and I just thought that kind of gave that Enrico Montoya kind of feel, just this sexy swashbuckling character. But that first, a lot went into the first line. He was lying on the temple floor, meek as a mantis, since before the sun was set. Even back in the original submission, it begins with Dahan in his temple, like talking to God, and it's just the perfect parallel in the sense that like Bran is a god now. He's one of the old gods. People are going to worship him. The glass candle is a clear parallel to the werewood nets. So this is a situation where he is also being seen as a god. Later though, you kind of get this idea that it's a two-way worship. That yes, Dahan is worshiping Sam as the Pale Child Bacalon, but Sam is worshiping the Bravo as a god as well. And there's actually a two-way worship here. That the Bravo is going to save. It's just going to solve all of Sam's problems, And meanwhile, like Dahan worships Sam as a god. So there's a two-way worship going on. Meek as a mantis. Originally, this was like reverent as a mantis. We wanted to, have him be a water dancer and have him use Arya-like phrases, but not too many, and not make it like if you immediately went still a stone, you'd be like, oh, come on. So it used to be reverent as a mantis, but meek as a mantis. Meek kind of, means like weak and submissive, and the mantis is already praying. So the idea is that he's like submitting. He's submitting and praying. So he's meek as a mantis. Meek as a praying mantis is that meaning, originally reverent as a mantis, which would be like, pious or whatever, worshiping. Since the sun is set, he lifted his gaze at the image of the pale child before him, enshrined in an ornate pyramid of glass. The pyramid is a aspect of And Seven Times Never Kill Man. In that story, the worshippers of Bacalon go and are destroying this culture that has a bunch of pyramids, and then at the end they find this pyramid of glass with the pale child in it, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is a sign from the pale child. And it's a reference to that, but that like, okay, worshippers of Bacalon, what would that look like in this world? Well, a pyramid of glass with like at the end of that story. And so this, porcelain skin, kind of this reveal that they're looking at a statue. It's and then you get this idea that he's speaking and through the whispers on the wind, which is very much like the werewood, that he's receiving a message on the wind here. Dahan could hear the voice of Bacalon. My sword is yours. And then we just kind of, this is kind of just kind of funny stuff. Like there's a lot of humor in this, dark humor in this chapter. So he's like, oh, I'm going to fast for you. And they're like, no, no, don't fast. What are you doing? Um, and then we get to the characters, Traegar O'Malley. And so we're bringing in, Jorah's ex-wife, Lyness and Traegar. And they're important characters in the sense that they're um, so off page and not dealt with, but so important to Jorah's psychology, but also very important in the sense that they're providing ships for the High Towers, for the battle against Euron. The original submission had them had it interfering with the ships and everything, but timeline wise, I just didn't think that worked out. So it just timeline wise, it just seems like the ships would be gone already. They would be arriving around the same time as the red wine ships, and that just has to do with like where Lyce is on the map. Like it turns out like going from Old Town to Lyce is fairly short distance. Like King's Landing to Lyce is like the same. So like the fact that the red wines are like slowed and everything with the taking of Dragonstone means that there's actually even a chance that the High Towers would come back with their ships first. But the idea is we're just going to have all the ships come back at the same time. But we very quickly get into the summarizing what's going on. The Merchant Prince Traegar has bought this slave girl, and we hear about the buying of the slaves of potential slaves in the Arya chapter. That spoiler here, like in the end, like it's not Gilly, it's Mother Mole. And in the submissions I knew it was going to be a wildling from Hardhome, because we hear about the wildlings in Hardhome, and then we hear in the Arya chapter that the Lyseni ships had picked, two Lyseni ships had picked up a couple. One had landed in Bravos, and then the other they think probably makes it back to Lyce. The Elephant is the name of the ship, and one of the submissions had it being Mother Mole, and I was like, oh, that's just fucking perfect. Like, well, one, it's the only wildling that we know by name, so but it's just like, oh gosh, like why wouldn't it be Mother Mole? Of course, it's so perfect that she's Mother Mole, especially considering that she's like, we're gonna conflate this, like, oh, she's seen things, and it's like, well, what does that mean? And so yeah, so it all comes together. There's a lot of things that are happy coincidences that all come together to make this chapter really, really perfect. So Mother Mole is ends up being here, but so from the beginning we have that, which is when we do this description of Mother Mole, an adventurer, a mother, a warrior, like it's broad enough that you can be like, well, that describes Gilly. Like, oh, Gilly's a mother, she's an adventurer, she's seen dead men and monsters. Yes, like Mother Mole and Gilly have had actually very similar experiences. And then just kind of making it funny, like, oh gosh, like, they're gonna sexualize this exotic wildling girl and things like that. And what's very fun is that we talk about the rumor scaling the walls and escaping, which is, of course, Dahan's plan later, that he's going to scale the walls and escape with this girl in the same way that the rumors went. But there's a few, some things, it's funny because the things are just ambiguous, like wise beyond her years. Well, Mother Mole is like 40 something, but she's still wise beyond her years. And then, the Bravo felt his God recoil. Like, what would Sam think if like, he's hearing this kind of like idea of Gilly being described this way? He's going to like get really uncomfortable. And then, it's just kind of funny. I'm going to make this offering of blood, but like Sam would be uncomfortable with that. He would not want anybody killed. So he's just like, no, you can't kill. And then it comes back to the title, Seven Times Never Kill Man, where this is, where this, and sometimes Never Kill Man, where this comes from. Like, oh, right, never kill man. Sam wouldn't want anybody killed. And it kind of all like fits perfectly. What's funny is he says, "Forgive me my distraction for your purpose of. As penance, I'll make an offering of blood. I will open Traegar's throat. Your foes will be slaughtered and your carpet of your mats dyed red." That's exactly what happens at the end. You know, Traegar's throat is slashed. The carpets of his mans are dyed red, or at least with the guts of the guards that come in. And so the wind is howling. You know, this is all kind of werewood kind of stuff. And then the moonlight seemed to wobble over his divine visage. That's a reference to the prologue with the wobble of the moon. Just kind of a funny, you know, connection to it. That, you know, we kind of know that the moon has a wobble in Ice and Fire. According to the prologue, the moon has a wobble, and it's perhaps causing like some sort of or if we're not sure if it's the earth wobbling or the moon wobbling or the gaze of man, but that wobble is like what's creating like uneven seasons in a sense. So no one is to die, and he says going to require patience, obedient as a hound. We get another, you know, water dancer kind of thing, and then we kind of get the wake up of like Slayer, and this is Robert Frey waking Sam up. So this coming back, the room spinning, and then he's coming back and he's sucking in and he's feel like he's drowning. This idea comes from that story Under Siege about the time traveling dwarf. When he comes back, he feels like he's drowning because he's actually in a sensory deprivation tank. So this idea of like coming back and feeling like you're drowning was in my mind. And then I was like, well, when would Sam ever feel like he's drowning? Oh, right, he's got those blood baths. He had that blood bath when he was a child that was so traumatic with where his dad brought in warlocks from Karth. And that can relate to like tasting blood, like the feelings people have when there's the tasting blood of like Bran tasting blood, but there's also like when telepathic things kind of happen in Ice and Fire, you'll often hear like the characters will taste metal or taste blood. And I'm not for sure. It's one of these things that if I saw George R. R. Martin, maybe I'd ask him and then he'd deny it. But like, there is something to do with like, if you get like parts of your brain getting hit and activated and like the taste of metal in one's mouth, there's like a weird tingling taste of metal. And I wonder if like George thought about that or not when he talks about that, or if it's just a coincidence that people are tasting blood in their mouth all the time, because you know blood has a metallic taste to it because of the iron. Anyway, so he's coughing violently, gasping for air. Father, please. Some people didn't catch that this is about the bath, because it is kind of just a throwaway line in a Game of Thrones. But yeah, Sam was bathed in blood when he was young to try to get the cravenness out by warlocks of Karth. So, and then so Sam opens his eyes and he sees Robert Frey. Robert is listed as an acolyte at the Citadel in the appendix of, and so we knew that Robert had to be a character. He gets mentioned in the prologue because we knew we kind of needed to bring him in. But it works out really, really well because by coincidence, Robert's brother, Malwyn, is in Lice, which I think some of the submissions like caught and then added Malwyn as a character. And so, which formulated the whole plan. What's funny is that like the writing of this and formulating it is kind of similar to what Sam was doing. Like Sam is like trying to come up with a plan, and as writers we're trying to come up with a plan, and he's kind of doing the same thing, like taking these little bits of pieces of things and putting it together for a plan. So we get back to so it was just a happy coincidence that, I don't know if George planned it or not. Maybe he has the exact same thing in mind, but Malwyn is Malwyn being Robert's brother. Lice Old Town connection here. Get a little description of Marwyn's chambers. Some people ask, like, how is it that the Maesters have not, like, shut down this glass candle? Like, why is Marwyn allowed to have it? And it's like, I don't know. I don't know. It does seem that they just kind of forgot about it. And they forgot about it in A Feast for Crows. There's no reason that Marwyn should be having this glass candle in there, and everybody being like, yeah, it's totally fine that you have a glass candle. But so anyway, Sam wakes up and he's told that he needs to eat and he needs to drink. This is a kind of Jojen Bran reference, because when Bran wakes up from wolf dreams, he's told that he needs to eat. He's in too far. And then we have Robert, who in some senses Robert Frey is absolutely named after Robert the King. It was definitely like a Frey suck up thing. His sister is named Cersei. He has another sibling named Tywin. It's definitely like a suck up. So Robert is named after Robert Baratheon. So in a sense, like, there's elements of Robert Baratheon in Robert, and then even later in the chapter, we hear Robert compared to Robert. Well, Robert is named after Robert. So it's kind of funny. So he's going to be a big guy like Robert, and he's going to be like this best friend kind of character, like to Ned. And so there's also, for some reason, we add a lot of kind of like little hints at Hodor in this whole thing. So we, for just to kind of add like brand color to it all. So we get a little like rank as a stable boy thing. But this fits because, and this was kind of an accident, but Sam hasn't taken a bath in a while. And on the one hand, it's like he's not taking a bath because he's been just so obsessed with the glass candle, but also like there's the trauma of the baths with the warlocks. So he's like maybe also avoiding the baths because like he's been traumatized by thinking about baths every time he goes in and out of the glass candle. So this idea of like his friend's like, why aren't you taking a bath? And he's just, well, Sam doesn't like baths right now, not the bath. So Sam doesn't want to get drunk, but they have to get drunk. Novice of the Citadel has shed his maiden's blood. As in a sense that like Pate has gone from novice to acolyte, which I think is, pretty fitting in the sense that like Pate spends quite a bit of time in his prologue talking about his little adventure, or his of not having any links, and one of them being like the one link he should have is his Ravenry link, because he was assigned to Walgrave, but Maester Gorman doesn't like him, so he gets denied that one too. So it's kind of weird and fitting that like Jaqen Pate gets the link, that Pate finally does achieve it, but it's posthumous. Anyway, so we get this idea that we make it pretty clear that Sam is, because this was really disorienting, we get it's very clear that we're talking about Lyse and Gilly and the Babe, and Sam thinks that Lyse and Gilly and the Babe are together. And we kind of explain here, we kind of go back in time, very George R. Martin, start out new place disoriented, and then go back and explain. So this is how we got here, and he has to explain that the ship was gone. So this paragraph here is mostly just a summary of Samwell 5 to bring back the reader of what happened. He came in, he looked into the glass candle, he blacked out, and then saying that, oh, Gilly's gone. And we did mention of the ship, the city's curfew, which, because of the Ironborn, but at the same time, Quill and Tankard never shuts down. So for some reason, they get to defy the curfew. And then Kahoro Mo must have planned planned to steal it from the first. Now, um, the Summer Islanders are apparently like aren't a slaver society, but like Sam doesn't really know this about them, and Kahuro Mo can't speak to Sam, so he doesn't even know Kahuro Mo's like personality. And it does make sense if you like it is a mystery why Kahuro Mo really allowed Sam and Eamon and Gilly and the Babe to go to Old Town. Like they didn't have enough money, and the whole thing is that like they were stuck in Bravos for a long time because they didn't have any money, and Sam wasted his money on wood and all this silly stuff. And then Kahuro Mo is essentially a godsend. He just like takes them, and this is kind of a little explanation of why Kahuro Mo did it, in that he was planning on stealing Gilly and selling her. But that's not what happened. But it's very logical that Sam would come to that conclusion. Like, oh right, we got those passages for free, or for the price of books, essentially. Like, he took her to make up for it. It's kind of a fairly logical thing. So they would take on water and lice, which is also logical. That's where Victarion takes on water when he some of the Ironborn. Well, Victarion stops in Volantis, but others stop in lice. They can't all go in the same port. So, and then Sam is too craven essentially to go after, though he has other excuses. He doesn't have the coin. There's the Ironborn, things like that. So the Bravo will save them. The Bravo. So he's worshiping the Bravo at the same time as that the Bravo's worshiping him. Got to get some physical mention. There's always a physical aspect to Sam at various points, like his flabby arm. So you got to get some physical aspects to Sam in his chapters. And then it's not his night, and so we get this hint of that other people are using the candle. We hear about Leo, and originally this was kind of longer, that Leo had already like put his hand in water at a previous time and made him pee himself and cover him raving droppings, but it was cut back into just like Leo may do that, and then come on, Don't Make Me Carry You. That's obviously a Small Paul reference from Sam being carried by Small Paul in Storm of Swords. Don't Make Me Carry You. And then we walk through Old Town. There's always rains on the cobbles and people stumbling on the cobbles. This seems to be like everything in Old Town. But here we start getting all the hints of like, so throughout the Sam story, you get the hints of how he pieces his team together, and you get little hints as we go along on when he gets his team of 4. And so here it's like he stumbles, and you get steady as an ox, another reference to Arya with water dancers and stuff. But he stumbles on Robert, and Robert catches him, and he makes him think of Malwyn the Alchemist in Lice. So he decides, and really the Alchemist, when I read the submission that there was a couple submissions that had picked up Marwyn, and when I read that, I was like, oh, that's perfect. Like of course Sam would want to not hurt anybody so he could put everybody to sleep, and that's perfect. The Alchemist could be useful for that. So now, in a sense, it was just like too perfect that Malwyn exists as a character. And so when we get to the Quill and Tankard, so I wanted to make use of the nicknames, and I would say it's a tad off character that they're all using these nicknames, because they do not really like Lazy Leo, but I liked the idea of Sam thinking about his other nicknames. Also, like everybody having a nickname is kind of like a neat thing, because they do all have nicknames. It's just whether they use them is the issue. You find out that Robert's name is Butcher's Boy, which that's obviously a reference to Arya and Micah, her friend being the Butcher's Boy, another best friend kind of situation. But it's beyond that. Robert Frey's father is I'm trying to get his name here. Hold on a second. Raymond. Robert Frey's father is Raymond, and Raymond is the person that Raymond slits Catelyn's throat during the Red Wedding. So it's a really brutal nickname, and I don't know if Sam really knows or understands or like appreciates like where the nickname comes from. But like he's being called Butcher's Boy because his father slit Catelyn's throat like an animal and put her to death like a butcher. And that's why Robert is Butcher's Boy. So it's not just like, random kind of like name. Like it's a pretty brutal name. Like invoking the Red Wedding right there. I mean, it's as brutal as Hopfrog because Melander is disabled. He's got a bad foot. So Hopfrog is pretty cruel name, So is Whale Boy and all sorts of others. So he thinks of his other friends: Arx, Lover, Monkey, Stonehead, Toad. That's obviously like Gren, Pip, Darian, Totter, and what's the last one? It'll come to me later. He's listed later. But Lord Snow is not on the list because Lord Snow is dead. We thought you forgot the Men of the Hour. We have to pull in the gang. Armin the Acolyte is there. Rune is there. Aleros is off somewhere else, but Pate, but the crew is there. Melander, Rune, Armin, and Aleros, and Pate, the gang. Well, not really Pate, the gang from the prologue of A Feast for Crows. So it took him 5 years, 50 more. He could finish a chain. It's never really stated like how many links you need to become a maester, but around 10 or a dozen seems to be the right number. So it seems something like that. 50 years to finish it. And so Robert is actually being kind of a nice guy here. He's a nice guy, and then he also makes like some bad jokes later on. So he's a little mixed. But here he's being super supportive, and you can kind of understand why Robert is going to be, Sam's friend. We'll see if it's like if he's truly a good guy, if there's something nefarious later. But at this point, Robert seems like a pretty nice guy, except though he doesn't. The one bad thing about him is that he doesn't seem to believe in the others and the army of the dead. But he supports Pate here. And just establishing setting here with the Isle of Ravens. That's where Pate lives because he lives with Walgrave. And that's where Sam lives too. He lives in a chambers next to Pate, actually. And then where is our Sphinx? And then we needed to have in the Brave Companions, because the Brave Companions were heading to Old Town, so we're having the Brave Companions show up here, hinting at the Dornish master plan and things like this. So Aleros is over at the Quill and Tankard talking to a man in old leather cloak fringe with blonde hair. That is Urswick the Faithful of the Brave Companions. He is there. He is alive. And this was from, one of the submissions had him having a choker of thin bones around his neck. And if you can think, those are Jaime's bones. That's Jaime Lannister's fingers that have been made into a choker around his neck. So from his hand. So something off about him. He's paler than the dead. So he thinks of Small Paul and Lark and Chet, who he had to face in a storm of swords when they came back as whites. And then we say, the Sphinx, what is he doing? And what would allow them to dismiss it? And it's like, well, I guess our Archmaester Marwyn did this too, so they're just like, yeah, I guess it's normal. So then we had Laros outside the Blue Gate. Blue Gate's just a location that we established in the prologue, and so they speaking with an Ibonese man, a horse, a Zorse. There's four brave companions that I think are still out there alive. Um, there's Urswick the Faithful. There's Zolo the Fat. I think there's the Three Toes, maybe. And let me get the last name, but he's Ibonese. Oh, Tog Joth, Three Toes, Zol the Fat, and Urswick the Faithful. Yeah. So those are the four left. I haven't decided if Zol the Fat should be in Old Town, because one, like, Zol the Fat needs to at some point face off against Brienne at some point, and getting him all the way down to Old Town and then all the way back up might be difficult. So I don't know if Zolo should be with them, but I mean, it would make sense if he's with them, considering but at the same time, it's just geography. How are you going to get him back and forth? Gotta get Zolo back up to Brienne at some point. Somebody made this joke. This was a joke from stream about if you're on top of a Zorse, are you a Zorse? And the brave companions rode Zorses, so like the Ibonese man is still he's a Zorse. He was not a horse, he was a Zorse. You followed him. Pate, of course, like catches on that he was following because he's a faceless man, and so he caught that sort of thing. But that's a little hint there. And we just had why would Rune observe this? Well, Leo was being suspicious. So, and then Melander's a big drunk, so we hear about him like just tolerating Leo, even though that Leo makes fun of Melander because he buys him drinks. And then we get into the what's fun about this is there's kind of two small councils. So you get the small council of the Friends at the Quill and Tankard, and then you get the small council of the Order of the Nightwalkers. And then both of them kind of talk about rumors, and so you kind of have these two parallel scenes of like two different methods of getting rumors, just like regular gossip and like using the glass candle, and what that means. And so Gorman Tyrell, he was actually put forward as a candidate for Grand Maester back in A Storm of Swords when Pycelle was put in the Black Cells by Tyrion. They were looking into getting a new Grand Maester because they were like, oh, Pycelle is no good. And then people are like, fine, Gorman Tyrell, and they're like, nope, let's bring Pycelle back. And so Gorman Tyrell was denied. So the idea is that yes, Gorman Tyrell would probably be like who the Conclave would send for a number of reasons, but because the Tyrells and the High Towers have so many connections at the Citadel. And that's what the crown would want, probably. I mean, with Mace Tyrell as hand or things like that. So, Gorman, but there's some interesting things as well, though, is because later on we find out that Gorman has Maester John's letter, and so Gorman Tyrell heading to King's Landing is a significant thing because that MacGuffin is moving now, right? So that MacGuffin gets flown, like John Vance's explanation on why the seasons are changing gets sent to Marwyn, but Marwyn's not there, so Gorman gets it, and then Gorman is going to become Grand Maester, and so he goes. And all this, what's great is that it all makes sense. Like Gorman Tyrell is the Raven guy now because Walgrave is out of it. So of course they would go to him, and then he has to become Grand Maester, and he just like throws it in his stuff, and then he's off. So then we get, we get mentioned of the Reavers, so they start talking about the Ironborn. Um, and so Leo would know about this because his family is so connected with all of this. So Leo's father is the head of the City Watch, and so they're going to hear about all the things with the red wines and the arbor, which is fun and cool because it relates back to Sam, who was almost betrothed to Desmara. So, and this is just kind of like stuff from the Forsaken chapter about different Tyrells and red wines dying. Here we're finally giving them names. So Desmond Redwine was slain with his wife and son. So Desmond Redwine, he's in the appendix. We're not sure his relationship to the main branch. So the idea is that maybe he was given the Isle of Pigs, and he's and so the Tyrell, the red wine, and the High Tower that they mentioned dying in the Forsaken chapter would be Desmond Redwine, his wife, who's a High Tower, and then we give him a Tyrell, a random Tyrell, Lorent Tyrell. I think he's I forget if it's Alla's or Alla's or Mega or Eleanor's random brother on the family tree. Nobody important, but he's in the appendix, but he's just a squire, so he dies defending them. So Sam is shocked, and so he wants to know about that. We mentioned Leighton still being up in his tower, looking at prophecy and whatever, which is kind of related to later, where we hear about Traegar O'Malley being up, worrying about prophecy. Hopefully, Leighton is not doing the same sort of shenanigans as Traegar O'Malley. But yeah, they, so we get some fun stuff because Robert's Riverland's person, so he's going to mention Lord Malister and his hatred of Ironborn, and we get the draining of blood, which is what they seem to be doing in the Forsaken chapter. But I mentioned here that they're in casks because this is, if you've guys seen the my Battle of Blood video, you can kind of see what's going on here. So we knew that they were draining blood, and now we're adding the idea that they're going into wine casks. And then, but we have this little joke about, they drink at the temples. Well, the Ironborn don't have any temples, And we get this little dirty joke here, killing or raping all the Ironborn know how to do a stab. It's a wonder their long ships don't sink from all 1,000 holes. The idea is that these Ironborn would be like either poking holes in their ships with swords or poking holes in their ships with their dicks, and would cause the ships to sink because all they know how to do is stab stuff, killing or raping. So there's a lot of jokes in this. There's a lot of very dark, dirty jokes throughout this entire chapter. What of Redwine's daughter, Desmara? And this is all stuff from before, that they had been almost betrothed, but the Redwine twins made fun of Sam, and I think he was eating an apple or something, and they called him a pig, and so, but the idea is that she was actually super beautiful, and that she had red hair and freckles and hazel, and this is actually it's funny because Sam is a stand-in for George R. R. Martin, and George R. R. Martin is kind of famously into redheads, so it's kind of the thing. So her hazel eyes, we're going to bring back the hazel eyes later. It's the idea that Dahan is kind of influenced by Sam's feelings, And then we get this line: "She would have been safe at Horn Hill, babe with the breast, but I wasn't." That's double meaning because he's thinking of both Desmara, but he's also thinking of Gilly at the same time. Gilly should have been at their plan. His plan was to send Gilly to Horn Hill, so she would have been safe at Horn Hill, babe at her breast. But he messed up. So we kind of have to mention a few other people that are there, like Meryl Florent and Meryl Florent he's gonna come in later because we're talking about like the usefulness of different hostages, and who's the true heir of of uh, of the Florent seat. Um, why am I blanking on on House Florence? Um, Brightwater Keep. Ugh, Brightwater Keep. But yeah, Meryl Florent the is secretly the heir, I think, right now, because um let's see here. Or he's oh, or wait, no, it's about what Colin we getting Colin to play ball or something. We're gonna he's gonna be useful later. Um but he's going to be useful later to have Meryl Florent. But the appendix does say that Meryl Florent was a squire there, but he's going to be useful later, I think. Um, Alakeen is of course in Old Town as well, so we just kind of didn't want to kill off these Florents that might be kind of useful later on to the story. Um, anyway, I haven't decided what we're going to do with Meryl Florent, but I wanted to keep him alive. Um, and then Desmara, we keep alive as a salt wife. Why not to the Red Horsemen? Give a shout out to one of them. And then Paxter's wife gets killed here as well, which is gonna be a big deal. But I think Paxter's gonna probably not fare too well. But nonetheless, this is all kind of mirroring we hear about the battle again coming, because like Baelor's galleys are seaworthy. Humphrey is returning with Lynessa's merchant prince with all the cell sales. It's This is all from the Forsaken chapter. Like the battle is coming, and then so what's great here is I'd mentioned the singer earlier, and he was singing like the Bee and the Fox. There's no reason we just made up a song, Bee and the Fox, like because of the Beesberries and the Florents are from the Reach. So they're in the Reach. What would be a nice Reach song? Bee and the Fox. Why not? And so but the idea is that Sam is sitting here thinking like, oh, how are we ever gonna get them out? How's Dahan ever gonna get in? And then he's interrupted by the bard singing Best of the Barmaid. And so this is where the idea is like, oh, I'm gonna get a singer to bring him in, which is kind of perfect, because it parallels Mance Rayder like sneaking into Winterfell and all of this. So he gets this idea that he's going to use a singer to sneak in as well, which is the fun thing, because then we get to use like I knew when bringing together the crew that you wanted as many familiar characters as possible. So the crew is Malwyn, who is Malwyn Frey, Robert's brother, and then we have Stannis' smuggler, Karane Samantes, and then you've got the fishwife, who from the Davos chapters, who helps Edric Storm escape, and then Colio Quainus, who was a singer in at Joffrey's wedding. So so it all kind of like it's fun bringing in like all of these characters that are actually like characters from the story at different times, all coming together and having this like adventure together. So yes, he sees this. This is now he's got in Sam's mind. He's got the alchemist, and now he's thought of the singer, because the singer was there. He's like, how are they going to get in and out? Oh, the singer. Okay. So then we get the story of Pate's Link. Oh well, Archmaester Walgrave tells him that he's ready, but he confuses him. Oh, Walgrave is always confusing. But how is he going to convince Maester Gorman to give him fair treatment? Well, he doesn't have to, because he's going to be in the privy all day, which is a callback to Tyrion poisoning Cersei, put her in the privy all day, same thing. And so then we have Maester Walder to fill in. It's funny because I knew I wanted to put in Maester Walder, and I got a lot of like submissions that are like several people were like, why is there a Frey and I never intended him to be a Frey. I just wanted to use the name Walder because like Walder is a common like Westerosi name. But then I realized like it's cool just to kind of reference again Hodor, because Hodor's name is Walder, and it's kind of just a reminder that Hodor exists. But we need. It turns out there's just not that many maesters listed in the appendix. There's plenty of archmaesters listed in the appendix. So maesters at the Citadel. So we needed to invent a maester. So Walder, and then it's like, well, then people are going to think is he. Then I thought, well, if all these like people submitting think that automatically he's a Frey, wouldn't the people in story also think this? So there's kind of this joke. There's kind of a meta joke here. Where everybody just assumes he's a Frey, but he says like not every Frey is a Walder, not every Walder is a Frey, which is a cool little thing because one, it reminds us of Hodor, but two, it reminds us of the other Frey maesters, mainly the Frey maester from the Elaine sample chapter, or the Elaine, I'm sorry, not Elaine sample chapter, but Elaine 2, the Veil maester, Theo. I'm so bad. Forgetting these names. It's he's Hunter. He's House Hunter, right? Williman Frey. So it's a reference to Williman Frey and Hodor at the same time. By saying not every Frey is a Walder, not every Walder is a Frey. So Paint gets his link, not Paint gets his link, and then we get a Rosie cameo just for the sake of it, and then Aleros buys them drinks, and so Samwell goes back, and then we knew we needed some like time of Samwell feeling sorry for himself and stuff like this. So he dreams of Jon, and he sees the Bravo sword in hand in a pyramid of glass. This is the whole making it a little more explicit that like Sam is worshiping the Bravo as a god, just like the Bravo is worshiping his as a god, because the Bravo is now in the place of the pale child Bacalon in the pyramid. So he wakes up, and days pass and we don't really hear about what Sam's doing. We later find out what Sam's doing, that he traded everybody's evenings, so he's able to like use the glass candle for like 4 nights in a row. But so he's only dealing with the glass candle, and then we deal with the order. He gets to the order. So we actually have, before there was a long little story of him going through the library and running into Armin, and Armin being like, Sam, come study with me, and he's like, I can't, I'm busy, and like this chapter is so long that it needed to be cut, and then it's referenced later, but it just needed to be cut. This is keep in mind that in all of Ice and Fire there's only 2 chapters that are longer than this, and that's Elaine 2, A Feast for Crows, and Crescent's prologue and A Clash of Kings. Only 2. And there's maybe only one other chapter that's kind of in the same realm, which is Tyrion 7, A Dance with Dragons, which is like Tyrion getting captured by Jorah in Volantis and everything they do in Volantis. Like walking around town and going to the window of the waterfront. Like that's a really long chapter. But for the most part, there's not many chapters that are more than 9,000 words. There's 3, and we already have 2 9,000 word plus chapters in the fanfic. So going forward, you really need to like not have chapters like this that go on forever. But this one I felt it needed to be long, but because there's so much in it. But so we get the Order of the Nightwalkers, which is a little bit of a reference to Urathon Nightwalker over in Karth. Day of the meeting happens. He's rapping on the door. He's got, of course, the knocks. First knock, Rangers returning. Second knock, Wildlings. Third knock is, of course, others, but he doesn't actually mention it. He just says count to 5, one last rap, because we want to be a little more subtle. You're late, whale boy, which is what Leo calls Sam. Armin delayed me. He tells the little story of him liking Armin and everything, and then we get in, and Samwell thought of bald archmaester with the lisp, Nemos. Nemos is actually one of the kind of other archmaesters that they list in the appendix, and so we actually don't know what his mask and rod are, so we made it brass here, which is one of the submissions had this. So it's like, yeah, why not? His one is brass. And so and then they come into this storeroom in the bowels of the Citadel, which is, obviously very similar to the conspiracy religious meeting of Arya in the Ugly Little Girl chapter, being in the bowels of the House of Black and White. And so here they are. They gather once a fortnight, and they have the glass candles, and so here we hear about how they all came together, which, of course, like when Sam arrives, he kind of knows that Alaris and Pate are in the room, so they know it first, and then he tells Robert, and then Lazy Leo somehow found out. Well, it turns out Lazy Leo knew before, in the prologue of A Feast for Crows. So Lazy Leo is known for a long time too, but Sam doesn't know that Lazy Leo is known for a long time. So he's like, somehow Lazy Leo found out. Well, Lazy Leo is known for a long time. Certainly before Pate. Keep Armin's beak out of affairs. Armin has a big nose. Leo makes fun of it. And then, what matters a little lateness? Ask Prince Rhaegar. Obviously, this is about the trident and the phrase being late. And so he says, he makes a pretty brutal joke there. What's the matter with being late? Ask Prince Rhaegar. Speaking of Walder Frey, Butcher's Boy, it's just getting us started. Which is, it's just a lot right there, with like, he's essentially saying, like, you guys are late to the trident, and then also your family to the red wedding, like, all in one sentence. Like, Leo's pretty brutal. And so Robert just ignores him and goes straight into his story. And so he essentially talks about how everybody's shown up at Derry, which is, information that we know from the Jaime chapter when he visits Derry, that he sees. Jaime lists it pretty broadly, but if you've ever seen my Frey Civil War video, you kind of know, like, when he says things like, oh, it's a cousin and an uncle and da-da-da-da-da, well, it must be these characters, and they're all Craig Freys, and, like, what's going on? So yes, the Craigals are gathering at Derry, and so something is building there. And this gets into, like, some interesting things because if Jenna Lannister becomes regent, she is going to be on the Lannister Frey side. I say Lannister Freys, I mean, like, her and River Run feeling like they should be the rulers of the Riverlands, versus, like, people that think it should be Littlefinger, and them collecting a Derry, and the Vale army coming in. It's quite a conflict brewing here, and this is all kind of like leading up to that. And so just John Bentley is just a random knight that was traveling that did stay behind with Strong Vor, and so that's why Robert Frey, like, goes into him. And so there was a lot of hinting that, like, Amy and Strongbow were flirting and stuff. So yeah, they're now sleeping together. So we're just kind of pushing forward everything that was kind of already in the Jaime chapter. And so then we get to the glass candle, and we get a description of like what it's like to be with the glass in the glass candle. And a lot of this inspiration is one, like just the basic description of what we've seen, well, what we were told the glass candle does from Marwyn, but also, descriptions of things and the limitations, being very Varamir six skins. We're Varamir. So here we're talking about like how it works. Well, we know from Marwyn, yeah, you can fly overhead and you can go in people's dreams, and that's essentially what they're describing. I'm flying, but if you're flying overhead, what are you going to see in the black of night? And so you have to go into the men and experience their dreams. And this is all stuff Marwyn said. But then we get this like idea of what people are compatible and what people are not compatible. And this is very much like what when Varamir Sixskin starts talking about which animals are compatible and stuff. So this is kind of the inspiration here. And then we just thought it would be fun to say that like, oh, you want to establish some limitations to the glass candles, that this takes time and there's certain people you don't want to do, like children and Sam can't do women and stuff like this. And there's definitely like this candle, this paragraph here, I definitely feel very sexual, where he's like, it's men and only men for Sam, and only men said that. Women, I can't, I can't, I've been unsuccessful with women. There's definitely like sexual aspects to this like feeling of this paragraph. Peyton Aleros though can go into women, which is interesting, obviously, because one, Aleros is Sorella Sand, but Pate, this idea that we don't know Jaqen Hagar's sex or gender or whatever. Like he's could be anything. So he could be either just faceless men can be or practiced and can just do that kind of stuff, or Jaqen Hagar might be a woman. Maybe the faceless men are all women. We don't know. We don't know. We know that Arya is a woman. Maybe all the faceless men are women. So some interesting ideas in that, but it's just fun that Peyton Aleros can do it. So plus it's a little too incriminating if Aleros is the only one that can go into women. So it takes some time to grow accustomed to them, to bond. This is very much like Hodor, like it takes, or Summer. Bran takes time to get accustomed, used to a skin, so it takes the same kind of idea with people with the glass candle. So yeah, so Amory Frey, we get the same sort of ideas that what's great about this is that when we're talking about Derry again, is that we bring up Lancel Lannister, who heard the call of the father, which of course, like now the fact that we're bringing this up in context of a glass candle, now we wonder, like, was Lancel Lannister receiving glass candle speaking to him because he heard the call of God, because Dahan is hearing the call of God in this story as well. So that's kind of nice. But then he just gets more Frey Civil War, a little more explicit here. Like, who's there? Well, Danwell, Alsander, Arwood, and then Oliver. His mother was Rosby. Some people are like, wait, if Oliver's there, who's going to be the ward at Rosby? Some people are wondering, and we'll figure something out here. But we wanted some Rosby phrase there too. So Leo's like, what's with these phrases? Are we counting weasels to sleep, like counting sheep to sleep, counting weasels to sleep? Hush, Leo, finish what you're saying. And he doesn't want to go on. And then what happens in the north? And so I kind of always felt like Craster's Keep. We need, how else are we ever going to get an update on them except through the glass candle? Unless like Summer goes there or something, it's really hard because there's just no points of view there. So this was the best way. We have 4 unaccounted for mutineers. The appendix of A Dance with Dragons lists 9 mutineers. 5 mutineers die in the Bran chapter. So what happened to the last 4? Well, they're still there, I guess. And so we just named them Bill, Carl, Dirk, and Oss, which happened to be, I think, the stewards. That the Rangers were the ones that left and got killed, and maybe the stewards are still there, which kind of makes sense. the Rangers would feel more comfortable, leaving. And anyway, she curses them all day and night, all day and night. We get this idea that she has her own death list, or that she's praying to the death god to kill them. It's kind of interesting that a faceless man is hearing these prayers, that she wants these people dead, which is what the faceless men do, is they hear people wanting people dead. So it's interesting, that Jaqen is hearing this, but she talks about her sons coming to take them. Of course, that's the others, and so, which we make pretty explicit here, where he says, "Oh, the sons are." And he says, "Oh, did you find the army of the dead? Look across many leagues, saw no armies, only snow and ice and trees." The only snow is, of course, like that's the Melisandre kind of thing. But also there's the idea is that a lot of the dead are underneath the snow right now, and they can kind of climb out later. But the reason he's not seeing the army of the dead, is that they're under snow. They're hidden. And so Robert, originally this was actually this joke about, maybe you should walk in the dreams of Grumpkins. That was originally Leo, but somebody pointed out to me, like, no, Leo was totally into like dark ideas and all of that, in the prologue. So it had to be given to Robert, even though it's a little weird that Robert's making fun of his friend, but it couldn't be Leo, So, then we kind of get into just some logical stuff. Like Sam would have broached the matter of the others, and they could have been open to it, but they just never glimpsed any others because they've been out there under snow. And then, and so then we just get the Leo, goes to see the Golden Company. We kind of know all this information from the John Con chapters, that they of course have Storm's End, and then he lost his cavalry. Armies go missing north and south. 2 missing armies. There's a lot of missing armies in Ice and Fire besides that, but and then this idea that Leo maybe would be pleased with this idea of like Daenerys and the dragons coming in. Yeah, and Sam, of course, is remembering back to Aemon's words. Make them listen. There's discussion about how much one Aemon mentioned here and there, like when he's at the Quill and Tancred, should he be like thinking about Aemon? But it's like he's super depressed and Gilly focused, so like it's hard for him to think about Sam to think about other things without detracting away from his obsession with Gilly. Or like if he's thinking about a happy thing about like, about Aemon or something, it takes away from the fact that he's depressed and focused on Gilly and things like this. So there's a lot of there's a lot of opportunities for all sorts of little Easter eggs, and there's obviously a million Easter eggs here, but so much was cut. This was actually longer, much longer, even though this is such a long chapter. Okay, so, and then he thinks back to Kahuro Mo and Marwyn, and then we get the now this is the little joke here about, so Sam eventually goes, and they say, okay, where's Daenerys, Sam? You're supposed to be looking across the narrow sea. And he's like, I've been looking at Dahan Padratho. There was some discussion about like how the glass candles work, and if they do use the moon as like a satellite for their signal bouncing, at what times would it work? Like how many hours ahead is Lyse from Old Town? Is it like 4 hours? And so like the sunset, at what time? It kind of works out if there's sun setting at like it's winter, so maybe the sun's setting at like 5 o'clock. It's 9 o'clock in Lice or something like that. If the sun's setting at 7 o'clock, so things work out. Um, but it's time zones. It's kind of a weird thing with the glass candles. Um, so anyway, the he says Robert looks up and he says, "I thought he was a crossbowman." This is a joke. This is a Three Musketeers joke. So most people don't think about it, but the Three Musketeers, they're swordsmen, but they're musketeers. Like their literal job is to use muskets. But there's not a single musket in the Three Musketeers. What's up with that? Like, what's up with where are the muskets? Why are these swordsmen instead of muskets? And the reason that they're the musketeers is because the plot is that D'Artagnan like has a letter where he's supposed to. It's like a letter of recommendation, and he loses the letter of recommendation to get him into the musketeers. And then he runs into like three of the musketeers, and then he has this like duel with them. And then they become they almost get arrested because they're not supposed to duel in the streets, and then so they end up fighting the people that are trying to arrest them, and then they all become friends. But the idea is that like, oh, I thought Dahan was a crossbowman. And he's like, oh, well, he left his home in the Disputed Lands to join the crossbow guard of the First Magister. That didn't come to pass. That's D'Artagnan's like story. Like he came to become a musketeer, but he lost that letter, so he couldn't be a musketeer. So he's just a swashbuckling swordsman the whole adventure. That's the idea with Dahan. That's what this idea about he came to join the crossbow guard. Like that Dahan is a crossbowman, but I thought he's a crossbowman and he's a sword musketeer. Okay, so that's the joke. But yes, then we get the third mention of the smuggler. The reason Sam thinks of the smuggler is because Tregor and Malin, that this is where they heard the gossip from about Tregor and Malin providing the cell sales to Sir Humphrey. The smuggler is there too to take Dahan away. And then we needed a reason why like Sam would be the one looking across the narrow sea, and the idea is that he's the best at High Valyrian, where the others aren't very good at it. Though probably Alaris is pretty good at it. He wanted to tell him about Gilly, but then they would ask him about him breaking his vows, and he'd feel bad about that because he's all weird about sex. And then we get into some more kind of interesting stuff about the Fishwife and Andrew Estermont and Edric Storm. And there's a lot of little seeds. I don't have a plan on what's going to happen with Edric Storm, but I kind of know that like George R. R. Martin placed enough seeds for Edric Storm that he has to come back into the story, but how is a question. And so Edric Storm is in Lice with his 4 loyal men, but one of his 4 loyal men is from House Sunglass, and House Sunglass guy is in Volantis. And so it's like, somehow that we've got this like House Sunglass being this like important nexus, and that's going to come back, but why and how and all of this is an issue. But so we kind of knew that we're just going to mention these pieces that are around, that Andrew Estermont, we mentioned Estermont also in the Elaine 3 and stuff like this, and Fishwife, but there's more to their story after this. And so by killing Tregor or Malin, we trigger a lot of cool stuff that's going to later happen by pushing. I mean, where does Lennes go now? Because like once Traegar's dead, Traegar's wife, who exists, she's not going to care about these concubines, so she's going to kick these concubines out. And then, you know, if the fishwife screws up and maybe gets himself killed, and you know, Edric Storm is probably going to get kicked out. And so, where would they likely go? Well, they can't go to they can't go to Old Town because of war. So maybe they'll end up going to Volantis, and we'll follow up with them in Volantis. You know, but there's we kind of knew that like Andrew Estermont and Edric Storm and Sunglass and all this stuff has to come back. So it's kind of all, and so does probably Liness, you know. So this is you know, Sam bringing it up because it's going to come up later, but he's also brings up the fishwife because, you know, he knows the fishwife is going to be. So now he has all four people have been mentioned so far. You know, he's got his alchemist, he's got his bard, he has a smuggler, and he has the fishwife. And so now his four people have all been mentioned in his story to piece it together. So then we also mentioned Alakeen Florent, who is Sam's uncle, who like fled to Old Town, and is being held by Lord Leighton, or being protected by Lord Leighton. We just wanted to mention him. We don't know what we're gonna do with him. I don't know what's gonna happen to him. And we get this idea of this if the boy is a bastard, only a king would remove the taint, who would legitimize a rival claimant. That blood probably would have been in there anyway, but it's also like, it's funny because I think about season 8, like where literally the Edric Storm stand-in, because Gendry and Edric Storm are combined in the show. So, but you know, Daenerys legitimizes Gendry. Like who would ever do that? It's like really bad move. Like, why would you legitimize a rival claimant? So, and then we get to the Sphinx, and this is just kind of bringing up the prologue again. But we get a mention of the letter and everybody's reaction, and it being just interesting that the person who's actually most upset about it is Leo, and just because this is kind of like, Leo's a complicated character. But this idea that this letter exists, and we kind of know that Maester Gorman takes the letter for safekeeping, and we also learned earlier that Gorman is heading to King's Landing. So the letter with how why the seasons have changed is going to be moving around, changing locations, which is kind of like the Dragon books. The Dragon books, there's this background story that no one ever talks about, everyone ever thinks about. But Tyrion is reading some books, some dragon books from the Winterfell library, and takes them with him to the Wall as a loan. But then the library's burned down. So in a sense, those books were saved because Tyrion took them. He takes them to the Wall, and then he leaves them at the Wall. And then Sam takes books with him to bring down to Old Town, and he brings them on the Cinnamon Wind all the way down to Old Town. But then the Cinnamon Wind like is off, probably for Slaver's Bay, and so those books that have made it from Winterfell are now heading to Slaver's Bay, which is kind of a cool little thing. There's the same thing with this like letter going all around the world. And so Leo knocking things out of fury, order is adjourned. Should I keep going, or is we about halfway? We're about halfway. We'll just continue. We'll continue this in part 2, because I think I'm about halfway, and this is such a long chapter. But I'll continue on. Thank you, and I'll see you in part 2.